The battlefield was silent now, save for the faint hum of the Earth soldiers' victory banners, flickering against the pale light of the twin suns. Ethan Reeves stood at the edge of the broken alien city, his combat armor scuffed, and his face shadowed with exhaustion. The war against the Zarnok Empire had been brutal, but today marked its end. The treaty was signed, and Earth's forces had prevailed. Ethan barely noticed the cheers of his comrades as they celebrated the hard-earned triumph. His mind was elsewhere, lingering on the cost of the war, the lives lost, both human and alien, and the destruction left behind. He was ready to leave this planet and the memories tied to it. Lieutenant Reeves. A sharp voice interrupted his thoughts. Ethan turned to see Commander Voss approaching, flanked by two tall, armored Zarnok guards. Between them stood a young alien woman, her wrists bound with glowing restraints. Her silvery skin shimmered faintly under the light, and her violet eyes, though lowered, burned with a quiet intensity. "You've been selected for a special honor," Voss said with a grim smile. "As one of the heroes of this campaign, the Zarnok High Council has offered you a reward." "Her." He gestured toward the woman. Ethan blinked, his jaw tightening. "Her," he echoed, disbelief creeping into his voice. "A servant," Voss clarified, as though it explained everything. "The Zarnok view it as a gesture of reconciliation. She'll serve you as a sign of their gratitude for sparing their capital." Ethan stared at the woman, who remained silent but alert. She looked nothing like the Zarnok soldiers he had fought. Her frame was slender, her features delicate, but there was a quiet defiance in the way she stood, even with her hands bound. "I didn't ask for this," Ethan said firmly, his tone betraying his discomfort. "It's not about what you want," Voss replied. "It's about politics. Take her, Lieutenant. That's an order." Ethan hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. He couldn't risk offending the Zarnok leadership and jeopardizing the fragile peace. "Fine," he said, though his voice was heavy with reluctance. "What's her name?" "She hasn't spoken," Voss said dismissively. "She's yours to deal with now." Dismissed. The woman was handed over to Ethan, who accepted the situation with an uneasy nod. He gestured for her to follow him back to his quarters aboard the transport ship. She obeyed silently, her violet eyes briefly meeting his before she looked away. The small cabin aboard the Earth Fleet's transport vessel felt even more cramped with the addition of another occupant. Ethan dropped his gear onto a chair and turned to face the woman. She stood near the door, her hands still bound and her expression unreadable. "You don't have to just stand there," Ethan said awkwardly. He wasn't sure how to address her. She was supposed to be his reward, but the thought made his stomach twist. "What's your name?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, in a voice soft yet laced with steel, she said, "Zalira." Ethan raised an eyebrow. It was a name unlike any he'd heard before. "Okay, Zalira," he said, pulling a small device from his belt. "Let's get those restraints off." Her eyes widened slightly as he deactivated the glowing cuffs. She rubbed her wrists but said nothing, watching him carefully. "I don't know how things work on your planet," Ethan said, "but I'm not interested in having a servant. You're free to do as you please while we're on this ship. Just try not to cause any trouble." Zalira tilted her head, her gaze studying him intently. "You are different from the others," she said finally. Ethan frowned. "The others? The ones who conquer. They do not show kindness," she said simply. Ethan sighed and ran a hand through his short, dark hair. "Kindness doesn't undo what's been done," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Look, just make yourself comfortable. I'll figure out what to do once we get back to Earth." Zalira didn't reply, but a flicker of curiosity crossed her face as she watched him. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than met the eye, but he dismissed the thought. She was just another casualty of war, another victim swept up in the chaos. That night, Ethan lay awake in his bunk, staring at the metal ceiling. Zalira sat quietly in the corner, her posture calm yet guarded. He had offered her the spare bed, but she had declined. Something about her didn't add up. She didn't act like a servant, and there was a subtle grace in her movements that hinted at a different life. Ethan resolved to find out more, if only to understand why the Zarnak had chosen her as his so-called reward. Little did he know, Zalira was far from an ordinary servant. She had secrets of her own, and this journey was only the beginning. The hum of the transport ship filled the small cabin as Ethan Reeves busied himself with a handheld device, scrolling through mission logs. Zalira sat silently across from him, her slender fingers resting on her lap. She hadn't said much since revealing her name, and Ethan wasn't sure if her silence was a defense mechanism or part of some deeper plan. Ethan glanced at her, his soldier instincts on high alert. Her presence felt different. She didn't seem like the broken servant the Zarnak had painted her to be. She was too composed, her gaze too calculating. "You're awfully quiet," Ethan said, his voice breaking the tense silence. Zalira tilted her head slightly, her violet eyes meeting his. "What should I say?" "I don't know," Ethan replied. "Anything, maybe. Where you're from. Why they decided to hand you over like this." Zalira's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, it seemed like she wouldn't answer. But then she spoke, her voice calm yet tinged with something Ethan couldn't quite place. "I am from the capital city of Vilexis, or what is left of it." Ethan raised an eyebrow. Vilexis had been a central target during the war, a sprawling metropolis reduced to rubble in a crossfire. "And your role there?" he probed, leaning back in his chair. "I was a servant," she said carefully, her tone neutral. Ethan didn't buy it. Her demeanor didn't match her words. She spoke like someone used to command, not someone who followed orders. But he decided not to push further, for now. The following day, the ship's artificial night cycle ended, bathing the cabin in a faint blue glow. Ethan was tinkering with the ship's systems when a loud clang reverberated through the walls. "What now?" Ethan muttered, standing abruptly. Zalira, seated in the corner, was already on her feet, her movements swift and fluid. Ethan grabbed his weapon and gestured for her to stay put, but Zalira stepped forward. "That sound wasn't an accident," she said. "You think I don't know that?" Ethan snapped, but his frustration wasn't directed at her. Something was wrong. The ship shuddered violently, and the lights flickered. Ethan opened the door and peered into the corridor. "Stay here," he instructed Zalira, but when he turned back, she was already beside him. "I can help," she said simply, her eyes steady. Ethan hesitated but nodded. "Fine. Just stay behind me." They made their way through the dimly lit halls, the distant sound of hissing air and grinding metal growing louder. As they approached the source, Ethan saw a breach in the cargo hold. Sparks flew as the ship's automated systems struggled to seal the opening. "Looks like we're under attack," Ethan muttered. Zalira stepped forward, her gaze narrowing. "No, this is a sabotage." Ethan blinked. "How do you know that?" "The precision," she explained, gesturing to the damaged panels. "Whoever did this knew exactly where to strike to disable the ship's defenses." Her knowledge surprised Ethan, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. A shadow moved in the corner of his vision, and before he could react, a figure lunged at them. Ethan fired instinctively, the energy blast striking the attacker square in the chest. The alien collapsed, revealing its face, one of the Zarnak rebels. "What are rebels doing here?" Ethan demanded, turning to Zalira. She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes scanned the hold, her expression unreadable. The attackers kept coming, a small but determined group. Ethan and Zalira fought side by side, their movements surprisingly synchronized. Despite her delicate appearance, Zalira was quick and resourceful, using her surroundings to her advantage. Ethan took down the last of the intruders and turned to her, his chest heaving. "Care to explain how a servant knows how to fight like that?" Zalira wiped her hands on her tattered dress, her composure unbroken. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me," Ethan said, his tone sharp. Zalira hesitated, then looked him straight in the eye. I am not who you think I am, Lieutenant Reeves. I was taken as a servant, yes, but I was once far more than that. Ethan's heart raced, but he kept his expression neutral. You're saying the Zarnok lied. Why? Zalira's gaze hardened. Because I am a threat to them. And now, because you have me, you are too. Ethan leaned against the wall, trying to process her words. If she was telling the truth, then taking her aboard wasn't just an awkward reward. It was a political nightmare. Let me guess, Ethan said, crossing his arms. You're some kind of rebel leader or exiled noble. Zalira gave him a faint, enigmatic smile. Something like that. Before Ethan could press further, the ship's intercom crackled to life. Warning, hostile vessel approaching. Ethan glanced at Zalira, his instincts screaming at him to stay cautious. Whoever she really was, she had just turned his life into something far more dangerous than a soldier's simple post-war reward. The ship's alarms blared as Ethan and Zalira rushed back to the cockpit. The intercom repeated its grim warning. Hostile vessel detected. Prepare for impact. Ethan slid into the pilot's chair, his fingers flying across the controls. Looks like the rebels aren't done with us yet, he muttered. Zalira stood behind him, her calm demeanor in stark contrast to the chaos around them. This isn't a random attack, she said. They're here for me. Ethan glanced back at her. You sure about that? Her expression hardened. Yes, they want to ensure I don't reach Earth alive. Before Ethan could ask why, the ship jolted violently. The hostile vessel had fired, and her shields were barely holding. Ethan gritted his teeth as he pushed the engines to their limit, trying to evade the enemy fire. You're awfully calm for someone being hunted, Ethan said, his voice laced with frustration. Zalira didn't respond immediately. Instead, she moved to the console beside him, her fingers dancing over the unfamiliar controls with ease. Within seconds, she had accessed the ship's tactical systems, something Ethan hadn't expected her to know how to do. Let me guess, Ethan said, shooting her a skeptical glance. Servants where you're from also learn advanced starship tactics. Zalira didn't answer, her focus entirely on the screen. There's a weakness in their approach pattern, she said, her voice steady. If you angle the ship 30 degrees to port and fire at these coordinates, she highlighted a spot on the display, you can disable their targeting system. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before following her suggestion. The ship veered sharply, and Ethan fired a blast from their weakened cannons. The shot hit exactly where Zalira had predicted, causing the enemy's targeting system to flicker and fail. Nice call, Ethan admitted grudgingly. With the immediate threat neutralized, Ethan managed to guide the ship into the safety of a nearby asteroid field. The rebels couldn't follow without risking destruction. As the alarms quieted, Ethan turned to Zalira, his patience wearing thin. Okay, he said, crossing his arms. You need to start talking. Who are you, really? And why are these rebels so desperate to get to you? Zalira's violet eyes met his, and for the first time, her mask of composure cracked. There was a flicker of vulnerability in her gaze, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. I told you, I'm not a servant, she began. I am Zalira Velexis, rightful heir to the throne of the Zarnok Empire. Ethan's eyebrows shot up. You're a princess. Zalira nodded. When the rebellion began, my family was betrayed from within. My parents were assassinated, and the rebels seized control of the capital. I escaped by disguising myself as a servant. Ethan leaned back, his mind reeling. So, the rebels aren't just after you. They want to make sure there's no one left to challenge their rule. Exactly, Zalira said. If I survive and reach Earth, I could gain support to reclaim my throne. That terrifies them. Ethan rubbed his temples. Great. So now I'm stuck in the middle of an interstellar power struggle because the Zarnok thought it was a good idea to hand you over to me. Zalira's lips curved into a faint smile. It seems fate has a sense of irony. Despite the danger, Ethan couldn't help but admire her bravery. Most people would have broken under the weight of such a burden, But Celera carried herself with unshakable determination. "So, what's the plan?" Ethan asked, his voice softening. Celera hesitated. "I need to reach Earth and speak to your leaders. If they understand the situation, they might support me in restoring order to the Zarnuk Empire. Without stability, the rebellion will spread, and it will threaten more than just my people." Ethan wasn't thrilled about the idea of dragging Earth into another conflict, but he couldn't deny that Celera had a point. The rebels were clearly dangerous, and their ambitions might not stop at her planet. "All right," he said finally. "We'll get to Earth, but you need to promise me one thing." "What is that?" Celera asked. "No more secrets," Ethan said firmly. "If we're going to make it through this, I need to know I can trust you." Celera held his gaze, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded. "Agreed." As the ship drifted through the asteroid field, Ethan ran diagnostics on their systems. The earlier battle had left their engines damaged and their weapons nearly depleted. It was clear they wouldn't survive another encounter with the rebels in their current state. "We're sitting ducks out here," Ethan muttered. "We need a safe place to make repairs." Celera studied the navigation map. "There's a neutral outpost not far from here," she said. "It's small but well hidden. The rebels won't find us there." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And how do you know about this place?" Celera's lips twitched into a small smile. "Let's just say I've had to learn a lot about staying hidden." Ethan didn't argue. For now, he had no choice but to trust her. But as he set the course for the outpost, he couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were just beginning. Deep down, he knew Celera was keeping more secrets, and those secrets might end up being more dangerous than the rebels hunting them. The asteroid field provided a temporary reprieve, but Ethan Reeves knew it wouldn't last. The rebels wouldn't stop until they had Celera, or until they destroyed her. He piloted the battered ship toward the coordinates she had given him, his mind racing with questions. The neutral outpost came into view, a cluster of structures carved into the rocky surface of a small moon. It was hidden in the shadows of the asteroid belt, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "Are you sure about this place?" Ethan asked, glancing at Celera. She nodded. "It's a haven for traders, refugees, and anyone looking to avoid attention. The owners don't ask questions, and they don't take sides." Ethan guided the ship toward the landing pad, his nerves on edge. The outpost might be neutral, but that didn't mean it was safe. The hangar was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of oil and metal. Ethan and Celera stepped out of the ship, their footsteps echoing on the worn floor. A towering alien with 4 arms and a face like a lizard's approached them, its yellow eyes narrowing. "You're late," the alien grumbled in a deep voice, crossing 2 of its arms while the other 2 gestured toward the ship. "That thing looks like it's held together with duct tape and hope." "We've had a rough trip," Ethan replied. "Can you fix it?" The alien inspected the ship, its long claws tapping against the hull. "Depends on what you're offering." Ethan opened his mouth to negotiate, but Celera stepped forward. "We'll pay you triple your usual rate if you prioritize the repairs and keep quiet about our presence," she said, her tone sharp and commanding. The alien's eyes widened slightly, and it let out a low hiss. "Triple? You're serious?" Celera nodded. "Half now, half when the job is done." The alien chuckled. "You've got yourself a deal, lady. But I hope you know trouble when I see it, and you too are dripping with it." Ethan shot Celera a look as the alien walked off. "Triple the rate. Do you even have the credits to back that up?" Celera gave him a small, confident smile. "I have my ways." While the repairs were underway, Ethan and Celera found a quiet corner of the outpost to regroup. The main hall was bustling with activity. Aliens of all shapes and sizes bartered goods, exchanged information, and shared drinks at a dingy bar. Ethan leaned against the wall, scanning the crowd. This place might be neutral, but it's a powder keg waiting to explode. One wrong move, and someone will sell us out. Celera folded her arms, her expression thoughtful. "That's why we need to move quickly. The rebels won't expect us here, but it's only a matter of time before they pick up our trail." Ethan frowned. "You seem awfully comfortable giving orders for someone who's supposed to be in hiding." Zalira met his gaze, her eyes sharp. "You said you wanted the truth, so here it is. I've been fighting to survive since the day the rebellion started. I've learned to take charge because no one else will. If that bothers you, say so now." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It doesn't bother me. I'm not used to this. I'm a soldier, not a politician. I follow orders, not lead revolutions." Zalira softened, a hint of understanding in her expression. "And yet, here you are, risking your life to help me. That tells me you're more than just a soldier." Before Ethan could respond, a commotion erupted at the bar. The burly alien was shouting at the bartender, accusing him of overcharging. The argument quickly escalated, drawing the attention of the entire room. "We should leave," Zalira said quietly. Ethan nodded. "Agreed." As they made their way back to the hangar, Ethan noticed Zalira's posture shift. She was tense, her eyes scanning the crowd with practiced precision. "What is it?" he asked. "We're being watched," she murmured. Ethan's hand instinctively went to his weapon. "Where?" "Behind us," Zalira replied. "Two figures in cloaks. They've been following us since we left the main hall." Ethan glanced over his shoulder, catching a glimpse of the cloaked figures slipping into the shadows. "Let's move faster." They quickened their pace, but the feeling of being hunted only grew stronger. By the time they reached the hangar, Ethan was certain the cloaked figures were rebels. The mechanic waved them over, his 4 arms working on the ship with impressive speed. "She's almost good to go," he said, "but you're cutting it close. I don't like the look of some of the folks hanging around here." "Join the club," Ethan muttered. Before they could board the ship, the cloaked figures stepped into view, blocking the exit. They threw off their hoods, revealing the distinct markings of Zarnak rebels. "You thought you could hide, princess," one of them sneered, drawing a weapon. Ethan stepped in front of Zalira, his own weapon raised. "You want her? You'll have to go through me first." The rebels smirked, clearly unfazed. "Gladly," one of them said, charging forward. Ethan fired, taking down the first rebel, while Zalira grabbed a metal rod from the hangar floor and disarmed the second with surprising agility. As the fight raged, Ethan realized just how high the stakes had become. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting the only person who could bring peace to a fractured galaxy. And for that, Ethan would fight to the end. The hangar echoed with the sharp sound of blaster fire and the clang of metal as Ethan and Zalira fought off the 2 rebels. Ethan moved with practiced precision, his combat instincts taking over as he ducked and fired, narrowly avoiding the enemy's counterattacks. Zalira, wielding the metal rod she had grabbed moments earlier, surprised Ethan with her agility. She disarmed one of the rebels, her movements swift and deliberate, as though she had been trained for combat. Ethan had no time to question it as the second rebel lunged at him. With a well-aimed shot, Ethan took down the attacker. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by their labored breaths. "You're full of surprises, princess," Ethan said, lowering his weapon. Zalira wiped a streak of grease from her cheek, her violet eyes scanning the fallen rebels. "You're not so bad yourself, soldier." The mechanic approached cautiously, his 4 arms raised in surrender. "I don't know who you 2 are," he said, his voice a low growl, "but I don't want any part of this. Your ship's ready. Take it and go." Ethan nodded. "Fair enough. Thanks for the help." They boarded the ship quickly, every second feeling like an eternity. Ethan fired up the engines, the hum of the machinery a welcome sound after the chaos. As the ship lifted off, Zalira leaned against the co-pilot's seat, her expression unreadable. "They found us faster than I expected," she admitted. Ethan glanced at her. "You think they had help?" "Most likely," Zalira said. "The rebels have spies everywhere. They must have known about this outpost." Ethan tightened his grip on the controls. "Then we'll have to stay ahead of them." Once they were safely away from the outpost, Ethan set the ship on autopilot and turned to Zalira. "All right, Princess. Time to talk strategy. How do we get to Earth without getting blown out of the sky?" Zalira paced the small cabin, her hands clasped behind her back. "We need to avoid the main trade routes. The rebels will have them monitored. There's a system nearby with dense nebula fields. It'll mask our presence, but it's dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Ethan asked. "The nebula interferes with navigation systems. Pilots call it the maze for a reason. Get lost in there, and you might never find your way out." Ethan considered their options. "So either we take the safe route and risk getting ambushed, or we gamble on the maze and hope we don't end up stranded." Zalira nodded. "Exactly." Ethan sighed. "Great. Let's gamble. Set the coordinates." The journey into the nebula was as perilous as Zalira had warned. The swirling clouds of gas and debris made visibility nearly impossible, and the ship's navigation system struggled to maintain a stable course. "Remind me why this was a good idea again," Ethan muttered, gripping the controls tightly as the ship rocked from another burst of turbulence. "Because the alternative was worse," Zalira replied, her tone calm despite the tension in the air. As they maneuvered through the maze, Zalira worked on recalibrating the ship's sensors to better adapt to the nebula's interference. Her technical expertise impressed Ethan, though he couldn't help but wonder where she had learned such skills. "Is there anything you can't do?" he asked, half joking. Zalira smirked. "Plenty, but surviving happens to be my specialty." Ethan chuckled, despite the situation. "Fair enough." Hours passed as they navigated the treacherous nebula. The ship's systems beeped and flickered, struggling to keep up with the constant changes in their surroundings. Just as Ethan began to think they might make it through, the proximity alarm blared. "What now?" Ethan groaned, checking the scanner. His stomach sank. A rebel scout ship had found them. "How did they track us here?" Ethan asked, his voice sharp. "They must have placed a beacon on our ship at the outpost," Zalira said, her jaw tightening. "I should have checked for it." "No time for regrets," Ethan said, his hands flying over the controls. "Can we fight them off?" Zalira glanced at the limited weapons they had left. "Not for long. We'll need to outmaneuver them." Ethan nodded, pushing the ship to its limits. The nebula's dense clouds provided some cover, but the scout ship was relentless. Every time Ethan thought they had lost their pursuers, another burst of laser fire lit up the darkness. Zalira leaned over the console, her eyes scanning the sensor readouts. "There's a cluster of asteroids up ahead. If we can lure them in close enough, we might be able to use the debris to our advantage." Ethan grinned. "Now you're talking." He steered the ship toward the asteroid field, weaving through the massive rocks with a mix of skill and desperation. The scout ship followed, its weapons firing sporadically as it struggled to keep up. "Hold on," Ethan said, his voice tense. He guided the ship through a narrow gap between two asteroids, then looped around to position one of the massive rocks between them and the scout ship. "Now," Zalira shouted. Ethan fired the ship's remaining weapons, hitting the asteroid and sending a shower of debris directly into the path of their pursuers. The scout ship couldn't react in time. The explosion lit up the nebula, and then there was silence. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That was too close. Zalira nodded, her expression serious. "We're not safe yet, but at least we've bought ourselves some time." As they continued their journey through the maze, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was still ahead. Whatever lay on the other side of the nebula, he knew they would face it together. The ship emerged from the swirling chaos of the nebula, its hull scared but intact. Ethan Reeves exhaled deeply, his knuckles white from gripping the controls. The maze had lived up to its name, but they had made it through. Zalira sat beside him, her violet eyes scanning the navigation console. "We're clear of the nebula, but the rebels won't stop hunting us. We need allies, and we need them now." "Allies?" Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. "I didn't think your people had any left." Zalira's expression hardened. "Not all of my people sided with the rebellion. There are still loyalists scattered across the galaxy. One of them commands a hidden fleet in the Renovis system. If we can reach them, we'll have a chance to fight back." Ethan nodded, setting the course for Renovis. "Let's hope they're still loyal. Otherwise, this will be a very short trip." The Renovis system was a desolate expanse of space, its dim star casting an eerie glow over a cluster of abandoned mining stations. Ethan guided the ship toward a derelict station Zalira identified as their rendezvous point. As they approached, a transmission crackled through the comm system. A deep, gravelly voice demanded, "Identify yourself or be destroyed." Zalira leaned forward, her tone commanding. "This is Princess Zalira Velexis, heir to the throne of the Zarnuk Empire. I seek an audience with Admiral Kren of the Loyalist Fleet." There was a long pause, during which Ethan's hand hovered over the ship's weapons controls. Then the voice returned, softer now but still wary. "Proceed to Docking Bay 4, but if this is a trap, you won't live to regret it." "Charming," Ethan muttered, guiding the ship into the station. The docking bay was dimly lit, with only a handful of armed guards waiting as the ship landed. Zalira stepped out first, her head held high, exuding an air of authority that even Ethan found impressive. The guards led them to a central chamber, where an imposing Zarnok male waited. His silvered scales and battle-worn armor spoke of years of experience, and his sharp eyes narrowed as they fell on Zalira. "Princess," Admiral Kren said, his voice a mix of respect and suspicion. "I thought you were dead." "Many hoped I was," Zalira replied, her tone steady. "But as you can see, I am very much alive, and I need your help." Kren's gaze shifted to Ethan. "And the human?" "He is with me," Zalira said firmly. "Lieutenant Reeves has saved my life more times than I can count. Without him, I wouldn't be here." Ethan gave a slight nod. "Glad to be part of the introduction." Kren chuckled dryly. "Fair enough. Now, tell me why you've come." Zalira explained the situation, the rebellion's rise, the assassination of her family, and the rebels' relentless pursuit of her. Kren listened intently, his expression grim. "They'd grown stronger in your absence," he said finally. "The Loyalist fleet is no match for them in open combat. We've been surviving on hit-and-run tactics, but without reinforcements, it's only a matter of time before they find us. That's why I need you to help me reach Earth," Zalira said. "If the humans understand what's at stake, they may be willing to support us. Together, we can end the rebellion and restore peace to the Empire." Kren hesitated, his gaze searching hers. "And if Earth refuses?" "Then we fight with what we have," Zalira said, her voice unwavering. "But I won't give up. My people deserve better than to live under the rebels' tyranny." Ethan watched the exchange, silently impressed by Zalira's determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her people, for a future that seemed impossible. After a tense silence, Kren nodded. "Very well. I will prepare a ship to escort you to Earth. But be warned, Princess, if the rebels learn of this, they will stop at nothing to destroy us." "They've been trying to destroy me for years," Zalira said with a faint smile. "I'm still here." Kren let out a low chuckle. "Fair point." As the Loyalists prepared the escort, Ethan and Zalira took a moment to rest. The station was quiet, its occupants wary but resolute. "You've been through a lot," Ethan said as they sat in a small observation chamber, the stars of the Renovis system stretching endlessly before them. "So have you," Zalira replied. "Yet here we are." Ethan nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You're not what I expected when this all started." Zalira tilted her head. "And what did you expect?" "A helpless servant, maybe," Ethan admitted. "Not a warrior princess with a talent for making my life infinitely more complicated." Zalira laughed softly, the sound lightening the weight in the room. "Complications make life interesting, don't they?" Before Ethan could respond, An alarm blared through the station. "They found us," Kren's voice boomed over the intercom. "Rebel forces inbound." Ethan and Zalira exchanged a look, both of them standing in unison. "Guess the complications aren't over yet," Ethan said, his hand already on his weapon. "Not even close," Zalira replied, her eyes blazing with determination. Together, they headed for the hangar, ready to face whatever came next. The station shook as rebel forces began their assault. Lights flickered, alarms blared, and the air was thick with tension. Ethan Reeves sprinted through the corridors alongside Zalira, his weapon gripped tightly in his hand. Admiral Kren's voice echoed through the comm system, issuing commands to Loyalist fighters scrambling to defend the outpost. "They're here sooner than we thought," Ethan said, glancing at Zalira as they entered the hangar. "They must have tracked us through the maze," Zalira replied, her tone calm despite the chaos. "We can't let them destroy this fleet. Without it, we'll never reach Earth." The hangar was a hive of activity. Loyalist soldiers loaded weapons and prepared small ships for combat. In the center of it all, Admiral Kren stood, barking orders with the authority of a seasoned leader. "Princess, Lieutenant," he said as they approached. "The rebels have brought their full force. They want to crush us here and now." "Then we fight," Zalira said, her voice steady. Kren nodded grimly. "Our forces are outnumbered, but we know these asteroids better than they do. If we can draw them into the field, we might have a chance." Ethan stepped forward. "What's the plan?" Within minutes, the strategy was set. Loyalist fighters would engage the rebel fleet, luring them deeper into the asteroid field. Zalira and Ethan, aboard their repaired ship, would lead a small strike team to target the rebel command vessel. "It's risky," Kren warned. "But if we take out their leader, the rest might scatter." "Risky is all we've got," Ethan said. "Let's do it." As their ship launched, Ethan gripped the controls, his focus razor-sharp. Zalira sat beside him, monitoring the scanners. Outside, the Loyalist fighters engaged the rebel fleet, bursts of energy lighting up the dark void. "Stay close to the asteroids," Zalira advised. "They'll provide cover."